Today we're exploring Carl Jung's hidden gem of wisdom about worry, and I promise it goes deeper than just telling you to think happy thoughts. We're going to talk about shadow work, individuation, synchronicity, and all the exciting and sometimes controversial bits that make Jung's perspective so fascinating. Let's dive right in. Carl Jung had a surprisingly bold perspective on worry. He believed it was essentially a mental mirage, a sneaky trick our minds play on us. While most of us accept worry as a normal part of life, especially during middle age when bills pile up and careers or family responsibilities hit peak intensity, Jung's viewpoint calls us to question just how real our fretting truly is. He saw worry as a form of psychic energy directed toward hypothetical scenarios rather than actual realities. It implies that many of your sleepless nights could be traced back not to real threats, but to shadows of fear dancing around in your imagination. Interestingly, Jung wasn't suggesting we ignore genuine dangers. If your roof is leaking or you're facing a health crisis, that's a concrete problem requiring immediate attention. Instead, Jung's point was that we often construct elaborate mental forecasts, painting worst-case scenarios that might never come to pass. He described worry as living in a future that may never manifest, losing our grip on the grounded present moment where real life unfolds. Jung's approach is both liberating and unsettling. On the one hand, it tells us we have more power over our mental landscape than we might realize. We can learn to recognize the illusion of worry and shift our focus back to the present. On the other hand, it challenges the comforting idea that worry is an unavoidable byproduct of being responsible. Many middle-aged Americans assume that if they're not worried, they're being careless. Jung flips that script, suggesting that excessive worry is actually a sign of deeper psychological imbalances rather than proof of maturity. The fascinating part is how Jung encouraged us to treat worry not as an enemy but as an invitation to introspect. If you find yourself ruminating about the same problem repeatedly, maybe it's money, health, or relationships, Jung would say it's worth asking whether you are missing an underlying message from your psyche. That recurring worry could point to unresolved fears, hidden insecurities, or unmet emotional needs. In that sense, yes. Shadow work. Unearthing hidden worries is one of Jung's most talked about ideas, and for good reason. It helps us understand why certain anxieties keep popping up no matter how hard we try to shake them. Jung defined the shadow as all those aspects of ourselves, traits, impulses, and emotions that we shove into the basement of our psyche because they seem unacceptable or embarrassing. Anger, jealousy, fear, and even certain desires. If we can't face them openly, we tend to bury them, hoping they'll stay out of sight. Spoiler alert, they don't. Instead, those hidden elements do a little ghost haunting from within your unconscious, fueling a surprising amount of everyday worry. When you catch yourself anxiously obsessing over something, say you're worried your coworkers secretly dislike you, Jung would advise you to ask whether that fear might stem from a repressed part of your own personality. Maybe you once felt guilty for being too critical, so now you fret that others are judging you. Shadow work involves acknowledging those elements instead of pretending they don't exist. This is where things get a bit controversial because it can feel like you're digging into taboo territory. Yet, Jung argued that true healing and peace come from integrating what's in the shadows into your conscious awareness. Here's something not everyone realizes. Jung believed this shadow concept has a universal layer, which he connected to broader cultural and mythological archetypes. That's why so many of our individual worries end up sounding eerily similar across cultures and generations. Think of the universal fear of inadequacy or failure. It shows up everywhere, often disguised in different forms. By confronting your personal shadow, you also tap into a collective experience of being human. It's humbling but also comforting because you realize you're not the only one haunted by these unseen specters. The beauty of shadow work is that it reframes worry from a nuisance into a guide. Instead of scolding yourself for overthinking, you can see your recurring anxiety as an alarm, reminding you to examine what lies beneath. Are you suppressing anger or sadness? Embrace it. Jung's concept of individuation might sound like a fancy self-help buzzword, but it's actually a cornerstone of his entire philosophy. Individuation means becoming the fullest, truest version of yourself, unburdened by external pressures or societal masks. Worry, in Jung's view, often arises when we live in conflict with our genuine nature. Imagine a puzzle piece that doesn't fit the puzzle. There's tension, friction, and a nagging sense that something isn't right. That tension, over time, can manifest as persistent anxiety. Let's say you've spent decades in a career that pays the bills but leaves you feeling unfulfilled. Or you've conformed to family expectations that you really don't agree with deep down. Jung would argue that this inner clash is precisely what sparks constant worry. You're worried about letting people down, about failing at something you never wanted to succeed in to begin with, or about losing approval from those around you. Individuation flips the script by saying, what if you aimed to become who you really are, rather than who you think you're supposed to be? This process is not quick. It involves peeling away layers of conditioning and illusions. Some critics claim individuation is self-centered. Won't we all become egotistical if we only focus on finding ourselves? Jung disagreed, insisting that true selfhood actually expands your ability to connect with others. When you're not overburdened by anxieties from living a lie, you have more emotional room to care for family, friends, and community. It's like getting rid of mental clutter. You finally have space to see what really matters. Another little-known fact is that Jung connected individuation to spirituality in ways that make some modern psychologists uneasy. He believed that there's a transcendent aspect to the psyche, a sort of guiding force that moves us toward wholeness if we let it. Call it the self with a capital S, or call it your soul. Jung wasn't picky about semantics. He was simply convinced that if we ignore this inner urge to become whole, we stay stuck in cycles of worry. Individuation liberates. Among Jung's most intriguing and hotly debated ideas is synchronicity, the notion that certain events in our external world can line up with our internal state in ways that defy pure randomness. Think of it as meaningful coincidences that make you stop and say, "Whoa, that's uncanny." It might be bumping into an old friend the very day you were thinking about them, or finding a book that provides exactly the advice you need just when you need it. Jung didn't claim to have a scientific formula for these moments, but he argued that ignoring them might rob us of valuable insight. How does synchronicity tie into worry? Worry thrives on the assumption that we must control every outcome, plan every detail, and foresee every twist in our story. Synchronicity invites us to consider the possibility that life has its own rhythms, nudges, and hints. When we're too busy fretting over unknown outcomes, we might miss the subtle messages pointing us toward the right place or the right person at the right time. Jung suggested that when you let go of rigid worry-based thinking, you make room for these synchronistic events to guide you towards growth or healing. Critics love to pounce on this concept, calling it magical thinking or plain coincidence. Yet many individuals across cultures report experiences that feel too orchestrated to be mere chance. Jung himself remained somewhat open-ended about the mechanics of synchronicity, focusing more on its psychological effect. It jolts you out of the narrow frame of anxious thoughts and reminds you that there might be a larger tapestry at work. Even if you're a hardcore skeptic, paying attention to potential synchronicities can make life feel more connected and less random, a perspective shift that can alleviate some of worry's intensity. Jung never claimed that synchronicity cancels out rational planning or makes you invincible to life's curveballs. However, he did believe that acknowledging these patterns fosters a sense of trust in the unfolding of events. When you loosen your grip on the need for total control, worry loses its main fuel. So how do we combine all these fascinating Jungian ideas, illusionary worry, shadow work, individuation, and synchronicity, into something we can use right now? The key is recognizing that worry isn't just a random tormentor. It's often the psyche's way of waving a red flag. Instead of wrestling with worry as an unstoppable beast, Jung's approach suggests we see it as a messenger carrying clues about unresolved issues or neglected needs. Shadow work tells us that a portion of our anxiety springs from disowned parts of ourselves. By bringing them into the light, we diffuse their power to wreak havoc behind the scenes. individuation pushes us to align with our true self, trimming away the roles, expectations, and conditions that don't resonate with who we genuinely are. This alignment creates a life less prone to the chronic buzz of anxiety. Then synchronicity steps in as the element of wonder, reminding us that life can sometimes offer gentle nudges or even firm shoves that point us toward growth, connection, and healing, especially when we stop barricading ourselves behind worry's fortress. You might ask, all this sounds great, but how do I start? Jung didn't hand out quick hacks. He believed in deeper psychological work, like dream analysis, active imagination, and honest self-reflection. For those of us living busy modern lives, that might mean regular journaling, therapy, or simply carving out quiet moments to observe our thoughts. The point isn't to stuff down worry or force ourselves into blind optimism. It's to notice worry, question it, and trace it back to its source. Interestingly, some of Jung's work overlaps with mindfulness practices, which encourage staying present. If worry lives in the future, mindfulness anchors us to the here and now. This synergy suggests that even if you're not a dyed-in-the-wool Jungian, you can still apply bits of his teachings alongside modern psychology or spiritual traditions. The bottom line, understanding your worry rather than just enduring it can unlock a richer, calmer way of moving through life. Jung never promised a life free of challenges. He showed us ways to lessen worry's grip. Thanks for joining me on this deep dive into Carl Jung's secret to stop worrying forever. Jokes aside, I hope you found these insights helpful. Shadow work, individuation, and synchronicity can truly transform how we relate to anxiety. If you're eager for more, subscribe and stick around for future videos where we explore the mind's hidden corners, discover self-growth tactics, and share stories that spark curiosity. Let's keep questioning, keep learning, and remember, a calmer, more authentic life might be closer than you think. You've got this, and I'm cheering you on every step of the way. Thanks again, friends.